Hi, I'm Alex Howard. You're watching Conscious TV, and my guest in studio today is John Wilks, who is a practitioner and teacher of the Bowen technique. And today we're going to be having an overview of the technique, how it works, with a demonstration at the end. But John, before we come to exactly what the technique is and how it works, maybe just brief a little bit about how you got into working in this area.
Yeah, sure. Well, actually, it was an accident. I'm pretty frank about it. I was doing a lot of different sort of massage techniques at the time, and doing a lot of courses in advanced massage and reflexology, and I was just starting a training in craniosacral therapy as well. And Bowen really was taught only from 1993 in the UK, and I was doing my training about that time, so it was a completely unknown thing.
Okay.
And I was on a course, and someone said, "Oh, you've got to try this Bowen thing. It sounds, it's absolutely the best thing since sliced bread." And I didn't know anything about it. I thought it was some advanced massage technique that I could incorporate into what I was doing. So I went along to the course, and in those days it was taught. The whole therapy was taught in 4 days, which was a crazy thing, really. So I was inundated with all this material, which was very, very interesting. It was a very different way of working to what I've been used to. And I started using it in my practice pretty much the next week. Okay. Which is very irresponsible. Looking back at it, I have to say, not a very good thing to do. But anyway, one of my first clients happened to be this guy who had had a back pain for 15 years. He was a pharmacist, actually, but he happened to run a clinic. And he'd had a skiing accident about 15 years ago, and then had a laminectomy and a fusion in his lower back. And he'd been in pain for about 15 years, and he'd tried all kinds of different therapies. And I came along, and not really knowing what I was doing at that stage at all, gave him the best treatment that I could think of, which was the Bowen technique at that time, and he had a fairly miraculous recovery in the sense that he was out of pain for the first time for 15 years. So he was well impressed, as they say, and he said, "Oh, John, you got to, I run this clinic, and we give monthly talks in the evening of different kinds of therapies, and nobody knows about this thing that you do. So why not come and give a talk?" So I said, "Okay, well, fine." I turned up at this meeting thinking there'd be a few people there, and there was 40 or 50 people in this room, and I sort of got through the evening, did a bit of a demo, and sort of talked about it in the best way that I did. Because actually at that time I really had no idea either what I was doing or how it worked. I mean, it was a very mysterious thing, as you'll see. It's quite different from other kinds of therapies. So anyway, and so one thing led to another, and he said, "Look, all these people now you've done the demo. It was quite obvious that something is happening.
They want treatment, right?
They want treatment. Come and start in my clinic next week." So, and that was in '94. And of course, since then, I quickly did as many other courses as I could, and learned, basically how to do it. I think it took me about 2 years really to begin to understand what it was doing or how it was working.
It sounds like in the journey that you were on, it was almost like it chose you. It sounds
Definitely,
like you were doing a lot of other kind of body work and that kind of thing, and you went down the path of what was kind of drawing you.
Yeah, no, essentially, I actually nearly didn't show up for the course because I was so overwhelmed with all the other things I was doing. I thought, oh, not something else, But obviously, I'm very glad that I did.
Yeah, it's interesting because I was just doing some research for the interview last night, and I was doing some research online, and I came across a statistic that Thomas Bowen, the guy that developed it, went from nothing to seeing 13,000 patients a year or something, which I worked out was without a day off 36 patients a day. I mean, it's through what it sounds. This was before the days of the internet and that kind of thing, just through word of mouth. So it sounds like he had a similar journey, that it was just something that had its own almost life to it.
Yeah, he never really talked so much about how he developed it, except that he obviously, was a little bit of trial and error. But he obviously started at some point with an idea about working differently from a sort of osteopathic approach. Because actually in Australia, because he came from a place called Geelong, which is about an hour from Melbourne. And in his earlier life, he was a manual labourer, basically, and just in his spare time would sort of treat people in different ways with sort of healing what he called osteopathy, or what was called in Australia osteopathy at that time, which was unregulated thing. Basically, anybody who did a bit of manipulation and was called an osteopath. So he started in that way, but then at some point, it's very obvious that he changed tack and he tried a very different approach. And whether that was some inspiration or some eureka moment that changed, his direction, I don't know. But then from that time, there was a lot of sort of trial and error with his clients, and he was always trying to improve the technique, really. But what he came up with was a way of addressing the body very gently. So instead of manipulating bones, like an old bone cruncher, they used to call them, right. He would gently manipulate muscles, tendons, and what we call fascia, which is all the bits that surround muscles and nerves and tendons and ligaments.
Okay.
And he would approach it by very gentle pressure on those structures, and it would also involve leaving the client alone. So doing a little bit with them, and then leaving the client alone for a bit. So what it meant was that he could work on several people at once, and he would have, the reason he could see that many people was he had 3 treatment rooms in the place that he worked eventually. And so he would start with one person and then move to the next room and then move to the next room and then go back. And so then he could see 3 people at once.
Yeah, it's interesting because I experienced Bowen must have been 13 years ago, I guess it would have been,
right?
Now.
So
And that so it would have been quite early in its development. And one of the things that struck me was the kind of the simplicity and the subtlety in some ways. In that, I would be lying there to have a couple of movements, whatever you call them, and then be left for 5 or 10 minutes. And yet, at the end of it, would feel different to how I felt at the start. Now that was a surprise to me that something as kind of subtle as that could actually have that kind of impact. Yes,
and in the same way with craniosacral therapy, it's often that the lighter the touch, the more powerful it is in some way. It's a window into how you approach the body. It's often will take stuff on better if you're lighter rather than going in there hard when the body will sort of resist you. So there's an element of that to it, but there's more to it than that. I think what it is, it's addressing particularly what we call the fascia, which is a very interesting material, if you want, in the body. It's made up of collagen fibres primarily, and you can kind of see it like a network throughout the body. And I mean, fascia is a big topic in research at the moment for body workers. They're very, very interested in its potential, I suppose, and how it creates this kind of network of communication in the body. There's a lot of stuff to fascia that we don't know about. In fact, actually, there's a big conference in Amsterdam later this year on fascia. So, and a lot of very serious scientists are getting very, very interested in it and very excited about it.
It's interesting because obviously what most people are familiar with is primarily just looking at the bones, and that's where kind of chiropractic work and osteopathy primarily is working with that.
Yeah.
So it's obviously quite different in terms of the approach. And I guess there's also the idea that less can be more, that the body has an innate ability to heal itself and to do what it needs to, given the right support.
Yes, and that's very much what we're doing with Bowen. We're initiating a healing response, I suppose a little bit like you get in homeopathy or other kinds of therapy. But we're working on, as you're right, we're working on not on the bones. I mean, most people think, if you want to correct posture, or someone's got a crick neck, you've got to adjust the bones, But obviously, the bones are held in place by little ligaments and short muscles and longer muscles, and that relationship is what holds everything in place. The skeleton obviously doesn't hold up by itself without all the little muscles. So we're affecting the relationship between all these little structures, the muscles, the ligaments, the tendons, that hold the posture in place, if you want.